There was a guy named who had feelings for the narrator for a long time. From the very beginning, it was kind, patient, and devoted to her. He wasn't just someone who admired her from afar. He actively showed up for her, offering his support, kindness, and care in every way possible. He was always there whenever she needed him, whether it was to lend an ear, help her with something, or just be a comforting presence in her life. For an entire year, he pursued her with nothing but pure intentions. He wasn't just looking for a casual relationship or a temporary fling. He genuinely cared about her. His feelings were sincere, and he never hesitated to show them. But despite all of this, she wasn't interested, at least not at first. It wasn't because she didn't like him or appreciate his kindness, but because she was too focused on what others would think. At that point in her life, the narrator was deeply influenced by social perceptions and appearances. She cared about how people saw her and how her choices reflected on her image. Her mindset was shallow and immature, shaped by the fear of being judged. To her, dating someone like a guy who wasn't particularly popular, conventionally attractive, or seen as cool felt like a risk to her social standing. She thought, I can't be seen dating a loser or a nerd. Even though A was kind and genuine, she hesitated to acknowledge his worth because she was more worried about how others would perceive her choice. However, after a year of his persistence, she finally decided to give him a chance. Maybe it was because she realized how much he cared, or maybe deep down, she had feelings for him too, but had been too afraid to admit it. Whatever the reason, she agreed to date him. But even when she did, she couldn't fully embrace the relationship. Instead of being proud to be with A, she kept his secret. She was happy with him. He made her feel cared for, loved, and appreciated. But that happiness was tainted by the fear of being judged. Instead of celebrating their relationship, she hid it, worried about what her friends would say. She didn't want to be mocked or ridiculed for dating someone who wasn't cool enough. So, while she and A shared a real connection in private, in public, she pretended as if nothing had changed. This secrecy weighed on her in ways she didn't fully understand at the time. While she was with A, she wasn't allowing herself to love him freely. She always had a barrier up, holding back her affection out of fear that someone would find out. And even though it never pressured her to make their relationship public, it must have hurt him. He had waited for her for so long, done everything right, and yet she still wasn't proud to call him her boyfriend. Looking back, she realizes how immature and misguided she was. She was so focused on what others thought that she let it overshadow something that was actually good for her. She let fear and insecurity dictate her choices rather than appreciating her for who he truly was. Now, she regrets that time in her life, the time when she had something real but was too afraid to embrace it fully. After dating A in secret for about a month, the narrator finally decided to tell her friends. Deep down, she already knew how they would react, which is exactly why she had kept the relationship hidden in the first place. But at 19 years old, her friends' opinions held significant weight in her life. She wanted their approval, and part of her hoped that maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't judge her as harshly as she feared. However, the moment she told them, their reactions confirmed her worst fears. Instead of being happy for her, they responded with cruel, shallow remarks. They didn't ask if it made her happy or if he treated her well. Instead, they fixated on superficial things, saying things like, he's ugly, ew, why him? He's too short, he's not even that great at anything, and he gives me the ick. Each comment chipped away at her confidence in the relationship. At that moment, she let their words influence her emotions. Even though she genuinely liked A and had been happy with him, she started feeling embarrassed. It wasn't because of anything A had done, but because she let the shallow judgments of others cloud her perspective. She became ashamed of dating someone who wasn't socially desirable in their eyes. She knew it wasn't fair to A, and she hated herself for feeling that way, but she couldn't stop the thoughts from creeping in. Despite her growing insecurity, she couldn't bring herself to break up with A. She didn't want to hurt him, especially after everything he had done for her. He had been nothing but kind, loving, and patient with her. Deep down, she still cared for him, even if she struggled to accept their relationship publicly. Looking back, she realizes that the right thing to do would have been to let him go instead of dragging things out. But at the time, she was too conflicted and afraid to make a decision. Then came a moment that changed everything. A senior named B, who was already in college, asked her out. She had known B for a while and talked to him occasionally at school. He was someone her friends liked and respected, a guy who fit the image of someone they would approve of. When she told her friends about B's interest in her, they immediately encouraged her to say yes. They didn't care that she was already in a relationship with A. In their eyes, B was the better option, someone more socially acceptable to be with. She was faced with a difficult decision. On one hand, she didn't want to leave A, who had been nothing but good to her. On the other hand, dating B meant she wouldn't have to hide anymore. She wouldn't have to feel embarrassed or worry about being judged by her friends. The temptation to choose the easier path was strong, and in her confusion, she made a terrible decision. She started dating both A and B at the same time. At first, she justified it to herself. B was in college, and she and A were in their last year of high school, which made it easier to keep the relationship separate. She told herself she would figure things out soon, but the truth was she was avoiding making a choice. She didn't want to let go of A, but she also didn't want to lose the social validation that came with dating B. Her friends, of course, only fueled the situation. They constantly talked about her senior boyfriend, B, making sure everyone at school knew about it. The more they hyped up her relationship with B, the more difficult it became to hide the truth. She was living a double life, knowing that it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And then, inevitably, it did. The truth came out in the most heartbreaking way possible. It was Valentine's Day, a day meant to celebrate love, but it became a day of betrayal and devastation. A, ever the sweet and thoughtful person he had always been, showed up at the narrator's house with a box of chocolates and a single, beautiful rose. It was a simple but meaningful gesture, a reflection of the kind of love he had for her. Pure, genuine, and selfless. He was there to surprise her, to show her how much he cared. But just as he arrived, everything unraveled. His friends had sent him a picture, one that showed her with B, exposing her betrayal in the most undeniable way possible. Right in front of her, it received the evidence of her dishonesty. The moment he saw the picture, his entire expression changed. The light in his eyes faded, replaced by a mixture of shock, hurt, and betrayal. He looked at her, desperate for an explanation, for anything that could make this all a misunderstanding. He asked her about it, his voice filled with pain, but she couldn't say a word. She stood there frozen, guilt pressing down on her like a weight she could no longer ignore. She couldn't even look him in the eyes because she knew the truth. There was no excuse for what she had done. And then she saw something that shattered her completely, tears rolling down his face. The person who had been nothing but kind and devoted to her, was standing in front of her, crying because of what she had done. It wasn't just anger or disappointment. It was heartbreak. He had trusted her, loved her, and believed in her, and she had destroyed that trust. His friends, seeing the pain he was in, stepped in to pull him away. As they did, she heard them say, "She's not worth it." Those words stung, not because they were meant to hurt her, but because she knew they were right. She had proven herself unworthy of A's love and loyalty. She stood there, motionless, as she heard them drive away. Just like that, he was gone, and she was left alone with the weight of her choices. The person who had cared for her the most was now a stranger to her, and she had no one to blame but herself. In the days that followed, things at school were unbearable. She and Estelle saw each other in the hallways, but he never spoke to her again. He didn't even look in her direction. She wanted to reach out, to apologize, to say something, but what could she say? Sorry wouldn't be enough to erase the pain she had caused. Worse still, the very friends she had tried so hard to impress were nowhere to be found. The same people who had pushed her into making these choices, who had told her that dating B was the right move, suddenly didn't care about her feelings or the mess she was left with. For the first time, she truly realized how much she had lost. It wasn't just A's love, it was her own sense of self-respect. She had let others dictate her decisions, hurting someone who had only ever wanted to love her. And now, there was no way to undo it. Time moved on, but the weight of her actions never truly left her. In the immediate aftermath, she tried to act as if everything was fine. She kept up appearances with her friends, continued dating B for a while, and tried to push the guilt aside. But deep down, she knew she had made a terrible mistake, one that couldn't be undone. As the months passed, it remained distant. He didn't speak to her, didn't acknowledge her, and eventually, it was as if they had never shared anything at all. She wanted to reach out, to explain, to apologize properly, but she knew it wouldn't change anything. He had been deeply hurt, and the least she could do was respect the space he needed. What hurt the most was realizing that the friends whose approval she had valued so much weren't truly there for her. The same people who had pushed her to date B, who had laughed at A and made her feel ashamed, didn't offer her any real support. They weren't there when she felt the weight of her choices crushing her. They didn't care that she was struggling with regret. She had betrayed someone good just to please people who didn't truly have her best interests at heart. Over time, she lost touch with B as well. The relationship had never been built on something real. It was a decision made out of insecurity and pressure. Without the excitement of social validation, it faded, and they eventually drifted apart. And then she was left alone, with nothing but her regret. Years passed, and life moved on. She grew up, matured, and gained a clearer perspective on the choices she had made. She realized how immature she had been, how much she had let others control her decisions, and how she had hurt someone who had only ever shown her kindness. She heard through mutual connections that he had joined the army. She imagined him becoming stronger, more confident, and moving on from the heartbreak she had caused. She hoped that, somewhere out there, he had found someone who truly appreciated him, someone who wasn't ashamed to love him openly. She hoped he had healed, that he had found the happiness he deserved. As for herself, she carried the lesson with her. She learned the hard way that seeking approval from others at the expense of real emotions only leads to regret. If she could go back, she would choose differently. She would stand by it proudly, love him openly, and never let shallow judgments dictate her choices. But life didn't give second chances for moments like that. All she could do now was hope that he had found peace, love, and happiness. And she prayed that wherever he was, he had someone by his side who truly cherished him.